Thomas Reynolds was 57 years old, a disabled Army Ranger whose steel blue eyes had witnessed horrors most civilians couldn't imagine. His right leg, partially missing below the knee, was the physical reminder of an IED that had changed his life forever. For 5 years, his lifeline had been Atlas, a German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and unwavering focus, who wore a harness clearly marked Service Dog, Working Animal. Atlas wasn't just any service dog. He was specifically trained to help Thomas with mobility support and to sense the warning signs of his severe PTSD episodes. What happened when they walked into Harborview Cafe that Tuesday afternoon would outrage a community and reveal how quickly human decency can be both forgotten and powerfully restored. Thomas lived alone in a small ranch house on the outskirts of Riverside, a mid-sized town where he'd settled after completing his rehabilitation at Walter Reed Medical Center. 3 tours in Afghanistan had earned him a Purple Heart, shrapnel, embedded too deeply to remove, and nightmares that medicine couldn't touch. His military haircut remained a habit despite the flecks of grey now outnumbering the brown. The medals he'd received sat in a drawer, rarely seen but never forgotten. Atlas had been paired with Thomas through the Warrior's Companion program, a non-profit specializing in service animals for combat veterans. The German Shepherd had initially been trained for search and rescue operations, but his exceptional sensitivity to human distress made him perfect for PTSD support work. For 3 months, Thomas and Atlas had trained together at the program's facility in Colorado, learning to communicate through subtle cues that outsiders rarely noticed. The bond between them transcended typical pet-owner relationships. Atlas could detect subtle changes in Thomas's breathing and heart rate, applying gentle pressure against his leg when anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. The dog was also trained to provide counterbalance when Thomas's prosthetic caused him pain on difficult terrain. In the darkest moments, when memories of firefights and fallen comrades crashed over Thomas like waves, Atlas would place his head on Thomas's chest, the steady rhythm of another heartbeat anchoring him to the present. That Tuesday, Thomas had a doctor's appointment at the VA clinic to adjust his prosthetic fitting. Afterward, exhausted from the medical prodding and paperwork, he decided to treat himself and Atlas to lunch at Harborview Cafe, known for its waterfront views and veteran-owned distinction according to the sign in its window. Thomas's prosthetic leg ached from the long morning, but Atlas remained vigilant at his side, matching his halting pace perfectly as they approached the entrance, unaware of the confrontation that awaited them inside. The Harborview Cafe was bustling with the Tuesday lunch crowd when Thomas and Atlas entered. The hostess, a young woman with a name tag reading Melody, initially smiled as they approached, but faltered when she noticed Atlas. Thomas requested a quiet table near the wall, where Atlas could position himself without blocking the aisle. Melody hesitated, glancing toward the back office before reluctantly leading them to a corner booth. "I'll get your server," she said, disappearing quickly. Atlas settled into a perfect downstay position beside Thomas's prosthetic leg, nearly invisible under the table. Thomas had just opened his menu when a tall man in a crisp button-down shirt approached, a gold badge pinned to his chest reading Anthony Pearson, Manager. His expression was stern, lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, I need to inform you that we have a strict health policy against animals in our dining area," he announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Thomas looked up calmly. "Atlas is a service animal, not a pet. Under the ADA, he's legally permitted to accompany me." He reached for the documentation he always carried. The manager waved dismissively. "I'm aware of the technicalities, but we've had issues with people claiming their pets are service animals. Do you have proof he's professionally trained?" Thomas unfolded his Veterans Affairs ID card and Atlas's service certification. "He's a certified service dog. He assists with my mobility and medical needs." A woman at the next table leaned toward her companion. "Great. Now dog hair in my lobster bisque," she muttered. "Everyone has an emotional support something these days." The manager crossed his arms. "What specific tasks does this animal perform that are absolutely necessary for you to eat lunch?" Thomas felt his heart rate climbing. Exactly the type of situation Atlas was trained to help him manage. Several diners had stopped eating to watch. The manager's challenge hung in the air, demanding Thomas justify his disability to a restaurant full of strangers. "Sir, if you can't provide specific medical necessity, I'll have to ask you to take the dog outside. We can package your order to go." Thomas took a deep breath, focusing on the weight of Atlas against his leg. The dog had already sensed his rising tension and pressed firmly against him, performing his trained response perfectly. Several diners were now openly staring, a few with phones partially raised. "I'm not required to disclose my medical information to receive service," Thomas said quietly but firmly. "Atlas is a service animal as defined by federal law. He assists with my mobility issues and helps manage my PTSD, which I developed serving our country in Afghanistan." The manager's expression tightened. "Look, I appreciate your service truly, but we have other customers to consider." A middle-aged man from a nearby table nodded in agreement. "My daughter's allergic to dogs. What about her rights?" Thomas remained composed, though his hand had begun to tremble slightly. A tremor Atlas immediately detected, shifting position to apply more pressure against Thomas's leg. The dog hadn't moved otherwise, hadn't made a sound, confirming his professional training. "Atlas is better behaved than most humans I know," Thomas said, making brief eye contact with those watching. "He's also saved more lives than most people." In this room, a young server approached, nervously clutching a notepad. "Mr. Pearson, I could seat them on the patio. It's empty right now." "The law doesn't say separate but equal," Thomas replied, his voice steady. "I'm not asking for special treatment, just the same service you'd give any other customer." The manager leaned closer. "Sir, I don't want to make a scene, but I have to insist. It's our policy." Thomas considered his options. He could stay and argue, involving lawyers and formal complaints. He could leave and find somewhere more welcoming, or he could educate, something he'd found himself doing more often than he'd like. He stood slowly, Atlas rising in perfect synchrony beside him. "A policy that violates federal law isn't one worth defending," he said, reaching for his wallet to place a $5 bill on the table for the untouched water. "Come on, Atlas. We know when we're not welcome." With dignity intact, Thomas turned and walked toward the exit, feeling the stares of diners following him. Atlas stayed perfectly positioned at his left side, compensating subtly for Thomas's uneven gait. Outside Harborview Cafe, Thomas paused on the waterfront boardwalk, the spring air carrying the scent of salt water and distant rain. His stomach growled, reminding him of the lunch they'd been denied. Atlas looked up at him, attentive as always, to his handler's needs. "Not your fault, buddy," Thomas murmured, reaching down to stroke the dog's ear. He spotted a public bench overlooking the harbor and made his way toward it, each step with his prosthetic sending dull pain up his thigh. As they settled on the bench, a group of teenagers walked by, one of them pointing. "Yo, check out the military." "A dog," he said to his friends. "Bet he's trained to attack." Thomas ignored them, used to the comments. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a protein bar he kept for emergencies and broke it in half, offering a piece to Atlas. The dog took it, gently, consuming it with the disciplined restraint of his training. Thomas gazed out at the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed on the gentle waves. He reached for his phone and scrolled to a folder labeled Unit. The first photo showed Atlas in specialized tactical gear, alongside Thomas and 4 other soldiers outside a medical outpost in Kandahar province. Atlas wore military working dog gear, his posture alert and protective. That had been before the explosion that took half of Thomas's leg and the lives of 2 men in the photo. Atlas had dragged Thomas 30 yards to safety, despite shrapnel wounds in his own flank. There was still a small scar hidden beneath the fur on Atlas's right side. A woman walking her small terrier approached the bench, promptly steering her dog away when she noticed Atlas. "Is that dog safe?" she asked nervously. Thomas looked up, meeting her gaze. "Ma'am, this dog has saved more lives than most emergency rooms. He's not a threat to anyone who isn't a threat to me." The woman hurried away, pulling her dog along. Thomas sighed, checking his watch. Almost time for Atlas's joint supplement. The dog had developed mild arthritis in his back legs, a common issue for German shepherds, but accelerated by his injuries. "In service. Let's find somewhere else to eat," Thomas said, though his appetite had diminished. "Maybe that food truck by the park. No dogs allowed signs there." As Thomas and Atlas settled at a small table beside the harborside food truck, a young woman approached tentatively. She wore the uniform of Harborview Cafe, her name tag identifying her as Ellie. "Excuse me, sir," she said, nervousness evident in her voice. "I'm on my break, but I saw what happened back there. I wanted to apologize. What Mr. Pearson did wasn't right." Thomas nodded acknowledgement, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a brother who served in Iraq," she continued. He struggles sometimes. I know how important service dogs can be." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back, but I wanted you to know not everyone at Harborview feels the same way as management." After she left, Thomas and Atlas enjoyed a simple meal of fish tacos, the food truck owner happily providing a bowl of water for Atlas, who remained in a perfect downstay position throughout the meal. The encounter with Ellie had somewhat restored Thomas's faith in humanity, though the humiliation of the restaurant incident still lingered. Unknown to Thomas, back at Harborview Cafe, the restaurant had erupted in whispered conversations after his departure. A retired schoolteacher who had witnessed the entire exchange was speaking heatedly with the manager. "That was disgraceful," she said firmly. "That man wasn't causing any disruption. His dog was perfectly behaved." The manager maintained his position. "Ma'am, we have health regulations to consider." A younger patron had already posted about the incident on social media, tagging the restaurant and including a photo of Thomas and Atlas walking away. The post described how a disabled veteran had been refused service because of his service dog. Within an hour, the restaurant's review page was flooded with comments. A local veterans group had shared the post, adding details about Thomas Reynolds' distinguished service record and Atlas's background as a military working dog. The post had reached a nearby Marine Corps base where several officers were finishing lunch in the mess hall when one of them received an alert on his phone. "Captain Walsh," he called out to a woman reviewing documents at the end of the table. "Isn't this the same Reynolds you served with?" "Thomas Reynolds?" Captain Melissa Walsh looked up from her paperwork, taking the offered phone. Her expression hardened as she read the post, recognizing both Thomas and Atlas in the photo. "Get the car," she said, standing abruptly, "and call Ramirez, Jackson, and Torres. Tell them to meet us at the main gate in 20 minutes, dress blues." 3 hours after Thomas and Atlas had left Harborview Cafe, the dinner service was in full swing. The lunch incident had been largely forgotten by the staff, though the manager had instructed servers to direct any questions about the dog situation to him personally. The front door opened, drawing immediate attention as 5 Marines in immaculate dress blues entered in formation. The restaurant fell silent as conversations halted mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. A child pointed, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Captain Melissa Walsh led the group, her posture impeccable, cap tucked precisely under her, left arm according to protocol. The 4 Marines behind her, 2 men and 2 women, maintained perfect spacing as they approached the host stand. Their presence commanded the room without a single word being spoken. The hostess, Melody, stood, frozen, menu clutched to her chest. "To table for 5? She stammered. "No!" Captain Walsh replied, her voice carrying throughout the now silent restaurant. "I'm looking for the manager of this establishment." Anthony Pearson emerged from the back office, adjusting his tie as he approached. His confident stride faltered slightly as he registered the 5 uniformed Marines standing at attention. "I'm Anthony Pearson, the manager. How can I help you?" he asked, extending his hand. Captain Walsh did not reciprocate the handshake. Instead, she produced her military ID. "Captain Melissa Walsh, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. This is Lieutenant Torres, Sergeant Jackson, Corporal Ramirez, and Corporal Chen. We're here regarding an incident with Master Sergeant Thomas Reynolds and his service dog Atlas earlier today." The manager's forced smile faltered. "There seems to be some misunderstanding about our pet policy." "Atlas is not a pet," Captain Walsh interrupted, her tone measured but firm. "He is a decorated military working dog who served 3 tours in Afghanistan alongside Master Sergeant Reynolds. Atlas holds the honorary rank of sergeant in our records and has received the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for saving the lives of 4 Marines, including myself, during an ambush outside Kandahar." The manager's face flushed as he became acutely aware that every customer was watching the exchange. "I wasn't informed of the animal's military background," he offered weakly. "That shouldn't matter," Captain Walsh replied. Her voice remained composed, but her eyes conveyed the intensity of contained anger. "The Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't require veterans to present their service records or their animals' military decorations to receive basic accommodation." Sergeant Jackson stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Sir, I have Atlas's service. Record here if you'd like to review it." He turned the screen to face the restaurant, showing a photograph of Atlas in tactical gear, standing vigilant beside medical evacuation helicopters. "This is from Operation Mountain Resolve. Atlas detected an IED that would have taken out a transport carrying 14 wounded service members." The woman who had complained about dog hair earlier shrank in her seat, suddenly fascinated by her water glass. 3 years ago, Captain Walsh continued, Master Sergeant Reynolds and Atlas were conducting a routine patrol when they encountered heavy enemy fire. Despite sustaining severe injuries himself, Atlas stayed with the wounded and helped drag Master Sergeant Reynolds to safety after the explosion that took his leg. Lieutenant Torres, who had remained silent until now, addressed the room at large. "We're not here to cause a scene. We're here because when someone serves this country, human or canine, they deserve respect on their return home." A teenage boy who had been recording the entire exchange raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, Captain, I posted the video of what happened earlier. It's gotten over 10,000 shares already." The manager paled further. "This is a simple misunderstanding. If Master Sergeant Reynolds would return, we'd be happy to accommodate him and his service animal." "Sergeant," corrected Corporal Chen firmly. "The dog's rank is Sergeant Atlas, and it's not about a free meal now. It's about educating your staff on both the law and basic human decency." Corporal Ramirez produced a laminated informational card. This contains the exact ADA regulations regarding service animals. I suggest you familiarize yourself with it. We've also taken the liberty of contacting the regional manager of Harborview Restaurants to discuss implementing proper training for all staff members. As the Marines prepared to leave, the restaurant owner, a woman in her 50s who had been called in by a frantic assistant manager, arrived breathless at the entrance. She introduced herself as Patricia Lawson, approaching Captain Walsh with visible distress. "I just heard what happened. This is completely unacceptable," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My father was a Vietnam veteran. He would be ashamed of how we handled this situation." Patricia turned to address her staff and customers. "Harborview was founded to celebrate our community, including those who served it. We failed that mission today, and for that, I personally apologize." Captain Walsh's expression softened slightly. "Actions speak louder than words, Ms. Lawson. I understand." Patricia nodded. "Anthony, I'd like to see you in my office later. For now, please call Ellie in from her break." When the young server who had earlier approached Thomas appeared, Patricia addressed her directly. "Ellie, do you know where Master Sergeant Reynolds might be now?" "He mentioned something about watching the harbor sunset from Veterans Memorial Park," Ellie replied. "He goes there sometimes after his VA appointments." Patricia turned to her chef. "James, prepare our house special with all the accompaniments. And something for Atlas too. Proper dog-safe food, not table scraps." The teenage boy who had been recording raised his hand again. "My dad's a vet too. I can take you there. It's just 3 blocks down." Captain Walsh exchanged glances with her fellow Marines. "We'll accompany you." 20 minutes later, their unusual procession arrived at Memorial Park. 5 Marines in dress blues, the restaurant owner carrying takeout containers, the chef with a specialized dog meal, Ellie, and the teenage boy who had appointed himself navigator. They found Thomas seated on a bench facing the water, Atlas vigilant at his feet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the memorial stones, honoring fallen service members from all branches. Thomas noticed them approaching, his posture automatically straightening as he recognized fellow military personnel. Atlas remained in position, but his ears perked forward, alert to the approaching group. Patricia stepped forward first, her expression solemn. "Master Sergeant Reynolds, my name is Patricia Lawson. I own Harborview Cafe, and I've come to offer my deepest apologies for how you and Sergeant Atlas were treated today." Thomas stood slowly, years of military discipline evident in his posture despite his prosthetic leg. His eyes moved from Patricia to the Marines, lingering momentarily on Captain Walsh with a flicker of recognition. "Captain Walsh," he acknowledged, with a slight nod. "Been a while." "Too long, Master Sergeant," she replied, the formality of their ranks masking a deeper connection. "You're looking well." Thomas turned his attention back to Patricia. He didn't speak immediately, taking a moment to assess the sincerity in her eyes, a habit formed from years of judging character in high-stakes situations. "Ms. Lawson," he finally said, "I appreciate you coming here personally." Atlas remained perfectly positioned beside Thomas, though his eyes tracked each person in the group with quiet intelligence. When the chef knelt to place a container on the ground near him, the dog didn't move until Thomas gave a subtle hand signal indicating it was permitted. "I want you to know," Patricia continued, "that effective immediately, I've implemented a new company-wide training program on service, animal accommodation. Anthony Pearson has been reassigned to our corporate office, where he'll help develop our new inclusion policies." The teenage boy stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, I deleted the video I took. I was being stupid. My dad served in Iraq, and he'd be really disappointed in me." Thomas regarded the young man thoughtfully. "Keeping people accountable isn't stupid, son. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." Captain Walsh approached, standing beside Thomas as she addressed Patricia. "Master Sergeant Reynolds and Atlas saved my life, and the lives of many others in our unit. They've earned more than just a meal or an apology." Thomas shook his head slightly. "That's not necessary, Captain. I didn't serve for recognition." No, she agreed. You served because that's who you are. Thomas looked at the assembled group, Marines in dress blues, restaurant staff and a remorseful teenager, all gathered at a veterans memorial as the sun set over the harbor. After a moment, he reached down to touch Atlas's head gently. Atlas and I would be happy to accept your apology, Miss Lawson, he said. And your dinner. It's been a long day. Ellie smiled, relieved. We saved your corner table, sir. The quiet one with the wall behind it. As Thomas gathered his things, Patricia added, and we'd be honored if your Marine friends would join us. On the house, of course. 2 weeks later, Harborview Cafe hosted its first Service Saturday, an event conceived by Patricia Lawson in collaboration with the local Veterans Affairs Office. The restaurant's entrance now featured a prominent sign, Service Animals Welcome, we honor those who serve. Thomas sat at what had become known as the Atlas table, now marked with a small bronze plaque. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with activity as veterans from different eras shared meals and stories. Atlas lay calmly at his feet, occasionally accepting gentle pats from children whose parents had asked permission to approach. Master Sergeant Reynolds called Patricia, approaching with an elderly man who walked with a cane. I'd like you to meet my father, Harold. He served in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam. The two veterans exchanged knowing looks that spoke volumes without words. Harold carefully lowered himself into the chair opposite Thomas. Your dog reminds me of the K9 units we had, Harold said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water. Those animals saved more lives than most people know. Across the restaurant, Captain Walsh was conducting an educational session with a group of local business owners about service animal regulations and etiquette. The teenage boy who had recorded the original incident was helping distribute informational booklets, wearing a volunteer t-shirt from the Warriors Companion program. Ellie, now promoted to assistant manager, navigated between tables ensuring that the veterans and their service animals had everything they needed. The chef had created a special menu that day, with dishes named after military working dogs throughout history. A local reporter interviewed Thomas for the community newspaper. What do you hope people take away from what happened here? She asked. Thomas considered the question carefully, that dignity isn't something you earn through service or sacrifice. It's something everyone deserves by default, and sometimes the best way to teach that is by example. Later that afternoon, a family with a young daughter approached Thomas's table. The girl, about 8 years old, shyly presented a handmade card decorated with colorful drawings of dogs in superhero capes. My class made these for the hero dogs, she explained. My uncle has a service dog too for his seizures. Thomas accepted the card with genuine appreciation. Thank you. I think Atlas would agree that the real superpower is being there when someone needs you. As the girl left, Captain Walsh joined Thomas. You've started something important here, you know. 6 months later, Thomas stood at the podium in Riverside City Hall, Atlas sitting attentively by his side. Before him, a room full of business owners, veterans, disability advocates, and local officials listened as Mayor Franklin signed the Atlas Act into municipal law, a comprehensive measure requiring enhanced service animal accommodation training for all businesses within city limits. What began as an unfortunate incident has transformed into a movement, Thomas said, his voice steady as he addressed the gathered crowd. This isn't just about service animals or veterans. It's about creating a community where everyone's dignity is respected. Captain Walsh, now stationed at the nearby base as a training officer, had incorporated service animal awareness into the Marines' Community Relations program. Her unit regularly visited schools to educate children about military working dogs and service animals, bringing along retired canines to demonstrate their abilities. Patricia Lawson had expanded her initiative beyond Harborview Cafe. A coalition of 37 local restaurants now displayed the Service Animal Friendly certification, a program she'd developed with Thomas's consultation. Each establishment had undergone rigorous training, and mystery shoppers with service animals regularly evaluated their compliance. The teenage boy who had recorded the original incident, Brandon Miller, now headed his high school's Veterans Appreciation Club. He had recently been accepted to college on a partial ROTC scholarship inspired by the Marines he had met that day at the restaurant. After the ceremony, a woman approached Thomas with tears in her eyes. "My husband has PTSD from his tour in Iraq," she said quietly. "He hasn't left the house in 2 years. After seeing your story on the news, we applied for a service dog. This is the first time he's been in a public building in 24 months. She gestured to a man standing nervously by the door, a young Labrador retriever in a service vest. Beside him, Thomas nodded in understanding. "The first step is always the hardest," he said, "but he's not alone. None of us are." As they left City Hall, Thomas noticed a familiar face. Anthony Pearson, the former restaurant manager who had initially asked him to leave. The man approached cautiously, uncertainty evident in his stance. "Master Sergeant Reynolds," he began, "I wanted you to know that I've been working with the VA hospital as a volunteer. Your stand that day changed how I see the world." 1 year to the day after the incident at Harborview Cafe, Thomas and Atlas visited the Veterans Memorial Park once again. This time, they weren't alone. Dozens of veterans with their service animals gathered for the inaugural Paws of Honor ceremony, an event recognizing the unique bond between veterans and their service companions. Atlas, now sporting a bit more gray around his muzzle, sat proudly as Thomas attached a special commemorative tag to his collar. Similar tags were presented to each service animal present, each engraved with the words, "Loyalty beyond words." "Some battles don't end when we come home," Thomas addressed the gathering, his voice carrying across the waterfront. "These animals fight those battles with us, day after day, without complaint or recognition. They deserve our respect, not because of what they did in combat zones, but because of what they continue to do on the home front." The ceremony concluded with a demonstration by several service dogs, showcasing the various tasks they performed, from mobility assistance to seizure detection to PTSD support. News cameras captured the event, broadcasting it beyond Riverside to neighboring communities. A representative from the state legislature approached Thomas afterward. "We're drafting a bill similar to your local Atlas Act," she explained. "Would you be willing to testify at the state capitol next month?" Thomas agreed without hesitation. What had begun as one man's stand for dignity had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. That evening, as he and Atlas walked along the harbor, Thomas reflected on the journey of the past year. His phone buzzed with a message from Captain Walsh. Her unit was being deployed overseas again, but the training program would continue in her absence. Thomas knelt beside Atlas, looking into the intelligent eyes that had seen him through his darkest moments. "You know what, Sergeant?" he said quietly. "Sometimes the greatest acts of courage aren't on the battlefield. Every day, thousands of service animals help veterans and civilians alike navigate a world that often fails to understand their struggles. Their silence doesn't diminish their service or sacrifice. If you believe these four-legged heroes deserve recognition and respect, share this story. One voice can change a room. Many voices can change a community. And together, we ensure that dignity isn't just a word, it's a practice."